Okay, just a few concepts I wanted to explore or clear up a little bit with regard to your assignment on Neanderthal cognition. We got started with basically thinking about how Neanderthals might have thought and the sort of things that they might have thought about. A big distinction that I made that most of you got, but I wanted to be sure, is the distinction between speech and language. Speech, of course, is about anatomy. Speech is about the structures and the capacity, and anatomically speaking, to make a certain range of sounds. Now, humans, of course, have a range of sounds. I think in most languages there are 20 to about 50 sorts of sounds. Remember, these were called phonemes in the reading on principles of language. 20 to 50 sounds, vowels, consonants, that sort of thing. And it's been pointed out that Neanderthals, their anatomy perhaps wasn't equipped to make that full range of sounds. But that's not a very good or convincing piece of evidence for me regarding Neanderthal cognition and language, because of course you can be completely modern in the mind, in cognitively speaking, and have complete mastery of language, human language, even without any capacity for speech, anatomical speech. That is, a human being who has damage to the motor region or something and can't articulate the various muscles and the breathing and all of that, they might not be able to make the sounds, but they can use the structures, the grammatical and syntactic structures that are necessary for communication in human language. They can use sign language, for example. And for this reason, Merlin Donald, who wrote the book that I think I've referred to at least once, on the origins of the human mind, Merlin Donald actually thinks that speech is a subset or sort of a slave to what's most important, actually, which is grammatical language, or what he calls lexical invention. I mentioned that in the paper for Scientific American. Grammatic structure and lexical invention, the invention of words, the use of deep symbolism, all of those things that I mentioned, those are what's really critical about language rather than speech or the actual number or range of sounds that can be made. And that's very difficult, of course, to reconstruct for Neanderthals. How do we do it? Well, how do we do it for any pre-modern humans? We look at symbolism. The idea is essentially, if symbolism of some variety exists, then we're suggesting, or it is more likely that that symbolism, particularly if it's deep or Velcro symbolism, if that's present, then we're probably dealing with a hominid that has a cognitively modern mind. And so when we see things like cave painting, which there's an audio lecture and there are some images online and a PowerPoint now about cave art. When you see that, it's very clear that that's deep symbolism, that there are mythologies going on there and so on. What is less clear is, well, what precedes that? Is it possible to have sort of a flicker or a pre-deep symbol use of symbols? Is it an incremental thing that accumulates over time, or is it a switch? You go from a non-modern mind and suddenly you go to modernity. Tough question, nobody knows. Here is a hand axe, and these people hominids start manufacturing these at least 1.8 million years ago with this characteristic of symmetry. You see that it's made symmetrically. Well, some have suggested that even as early as more than 1.5 million years ago, people were imposing symmetry, and that this was not just a functional shape, that this was used as a symbol. So people have pushed symbolism even back to the world of Homo erectus. Having said that, that is one line of evidence, whereas when we get to anatomically modern humans, and we start to see what's called behavioral modernity, typified by things like cave art and the other things that you see in the list of characteristics in this week's reading by Ofer Bar Yosef, where he goes over the characteristics of the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. When you start to see those things, you know you're dealing with a mind that is doing deep symbolism and something very different than what we see in Neanderthals. There was a question about leadership and social arrangements, social organization in Neanderthals. When you look at modern foraging societies, let's say that you look at them, people of the Arctic, let's say, as a proxy, as a stand-in essentially for Neanderthals, what you find is that actually foraging societies are headless. They typically make group decisions rather than having one person in charge. On the other hand, is that the right proxy, or is that the right analog for Neanderthals? These Inuit people and Inupiat people of the Canadian Arctic and Alaskan Arctic, for example, they're completely behaviorally modern, whereas Neanderthals are not. So are they a good proxy? Tough to say. Should we use another animal? Should we use, let's say, large social carnivores? We know that Neanderthals were eating a great deal of meat, so should we use large social carnivores like wolves or cheetah, or, well, cheetah are a little bit solitary, or lions? Should we use those as our proxy for Neanderthal social organization and behavior? Well, just as modern humans are a little bit too close to us, those animals are probably a little bit too far from Neanderthal, because Neanderthal was certainly more, I guess we could call it, intelligent, and their behavior more complex than we see in lion, for example. So what we have with Neanderthal is essentially a hominid for which there is no really good proxy, and it's difficult to sort out. Keep in mind, when you look at those social carnivores, they have very strict hierarchies, and in fact most other primate species have very strict hierarchical arrangement of social power. So very good questions, interesting. We don't know. We don't know how to model Neanderthal behavior based on other life forms today. I think that's about it for now. There's one other thing, very interesting point. I think some of the work being done by Paul Pettit is some of the most interesting with respect to Neanderthal behavior. Paul Pettit is even in that one paper that you read, reconstructing possible life stages and the 3 stages of life that he mentioned possibly being reflected in their physical anthropology. And the archaeology of the burial or non-burial of the bones even of Neanderthal infants. Remember, in one cave, some of those infant bones were piled in a corner just with all the other bones of animals. In other cases, we have Neanderthals buried underground. The point being, Pettit is reconstructing, or trying to, and he uses some pretty compelling arguments, trying to reconstruct even life stages of Neanderthals. I think that's pretty fascinating. One of the things that I think that he is right on about, but it's very difficult to quantify or to be sure about, is that life would be marked by the accumulation of trauma. That's a very good point, very interesting to think about. Another interesting point is Eric Trinkhaus's point that yes, you see trauma in Neanderthals, but below the waist they have less trauma. That is, they seem to be taking care of their legs and their means of getting around. Very interesting and very important. A statistically significantly uneven distribution of trauma to the body. Less so on the feet and the legs than the upper body. And I can tell you, I've broken my foot here not too long ago, and I'm hobbling around. I'm off the crutches now, but I'm on this sort of foot brace thing. And I can tell you, if I were a Neanderthal, if this were 80,000 years ago, and I had done what I did to my foot, it would be very difficult to survive. I was unable to really put any weight on the foot. We don't know if Neanderthal had any kind of crutch or some kind of support, but it certainly brought home to me the sort of dangers and issues that would come up, significant issues that would come up with what today we would call, well, it's an inconvenience, but not a major life-threatening injury. For Neanderthal, that would be, I think, life-threatening. All right, I think that's it for today. I'll just pop this online, and then we'll continue on with the rest of the class.